Hi, Chef Martin in the ThermoWorks Demo Kitchen, and today we're talking about steak. Any time of the year is a great time for steak, and we're going to just talk to you today about some basics for steaks, as well as our favorite way of cooking steaks to get the best results every time. No surprise, it's going to involve a lot of temperature monitoring. That's how you know when your steak is done. First, let's talk a little bit about what steak is. Steak is those pieces, those cuts of beef that are tender enough to really just eat on their own without a lot of heavy cooking. They're very low in connective tissue. They're generally very, very tender. Steaks come from the top loins of the cow along near the backbone of the cow and some down the rear, the rump, just a little bit, because those are the most underused portions of the cow. That means they're the most tender. The legs on the cow support a lot of weight, and so they get used a lot. They're more tough, they're more chewy. That's where some of your tougher cuts come from, with a lot of connective tissue in them. But the ones up along the back are very tender because the cow doesn't use them very much at all. You've got the strip loin in there, you've got the rib loin, you've got the sirloin. All those things are up at the top of the back of the cow. There's not very many of them on a cow, and that's why steak is so expensive. You know, you want to buy like an eye of round or a piece of round or some ground round or chuck. There's loads of chuck on a cow. It's a whole bunch of it. But there's not very much steak on a cow, and that's part of the expense when it comes to steaks. Now, of course, because of the expense of steaks, you want to make sure that you're cooking them correctly. You don't want to spend all that money on a steak and end up with a piece of dried up, yucky, hard meat that's a hockey puck. We want to talk about how to cook them right. Now, just as an overview, these are kind of the three major types of steaks you run into most of the time, or they're comprised of these. First, there's the ribeye. The ribeye right here. This comes from the rib loin of the cow. This can be served bone in or boneless. This is bone in. This is right along the rib cage of the cow, right on the top of it. So that's the ribeye. And this is a great cut. It's fatty, it's rich, it's got a lot of rich goodness to it, and there's nothing like it when it comes to the smell of the particular fat and muscles that cook in the ribeye. It's a very unique thing. There's a lot of fat. Not everybody likes the ribeye because of that. We have some solutions for that on our blog. Look up our rib cap. That's a really fun post and a really fun way to handle that. That's the ribeye, and that's a great steak. One I don't have here is the sirloin. The sirloin's from a little further back. The sirloin is kind of the classic big steak, like your grandfather's favorite steak that's just a big piece of meat. That's because the sirloin is a lot cheaper than all these other cuts. So you can get a bigger piece for less money. It's not quite as tender, and generally there's a couple of thick, cartilagey membranes that run through the sirloin that you kind of have to cut around. It's kind of gristly. But if you want a big cut of beef that you can sear and it's going to have nice, strong, beefy flavor, the sirloin is great for that. It's not great for everything. If you want something a little bit more tender, these are more like it. Next, we have the New York strip. This is from the strip loin. Boneless, this is the New York strip. You can get that bone in, and then it's called a Kansas City strip. This is a great, as these steaks go, that's your lower cost option. It is slightly less tender. This is what I'll often order when I'm at a steak restaurant. If I go to a steak restaurant, is I'll get a strip. And then of course there's the filet. We'll talk more later about why I have this on some skewers here. The filet is from the tenderloin. That's a very small muscle. There's 2 on each cow. That runs down the back. There's only about 12 to maybe 20 of these on any given cow, and that explains their expense. This is the most tender steak. It is often and rightfully described as buttery, both in texture and in flavor. It is not powerfully beefy, but I love it. It's my favorite steak. I go for the texture on this one, and it's what I really want. So if you combine a New York and a filet with the bone in between them, that's what a porterhouse is. A porterhouse is a bone-in New York with part of the tenderloin attached to it. They come from the same loin down the cow, just on different sides of each other. So that's what a porterhouse is. A T-bone is the same cut, but it's from further down the loin where there's not very much filet. So the filet muscle narrows as it goes to the tip, and the part where it's narrower, that's where you're going to cut your T-bones from. So you get a little bite of filet, but you don't get a whole filet. A porterhouse has a whole New York strip and basically a whole filet on it. That's your basic steaks right there. But the important thing to know about steaks is that because there's not very much connective tissue, and because they're so tender, they tend to dry out very quickly and to overcook easily. The proteins that are in steaks, in all meats, but in steaks it's more evident, they start to contract at about 135, 140 degrees, and 150 they really contract more, and that contraction squeezes the water out of the muscle like a sponge, like when you wring a sponge out. We don't want that to happen because that makes for a dry steak. We want juicy, tender steaks. And that means that steaks are generally best cooked to about a medium rare temperature. If you like it rare, by all means do that. But if you like rare, that's great. A lot of people don't like rare. They want their meat a little bit warmer than that. Medium rare is 130 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit finished temperature. So depending on how you're cooking it, you're going to want to pull it from the heat before that, so the carryover cooking can happen without overcooking your steak. So rare is about 120 to 130 degrees. 120 is really quite blue. Medium rare is 130 to 135. Medium is 135 to 140. 144 really. Medium well is 144 to 154, and then 155 plus is your well done steak. So today I want to talk about one of the best ways to cook your steaks just right, and that is with the reverse sear method. One of the classic ways to cook a steak is to sear it in a hot pan and then put it into an oven to finish. And that is a great way to cook a steak. Honestly, I love that method, but the reverse sear is just a little bit better. And for the reverse sear, what we do is we cook it in an oven, a low heat source, until we get about 15 or 20 degrees below where we want to finish the steak at, depending on the size of the steak and how we're going to be cooking it after. And then we sear it right at the very end, and that just puts that crust on the steak that you want. Beef is tasty. Beef tartare is actually very good, though it's not very fashionable in America. But beef is good on its own, but it's so much better with a sear, right? That crustiness from a grill or from a sear in a pan, that gives it that Maillard browning that happens starting about 300-ish degrees, where those proteins are going to break down and mix with oxygen and things like that and create all sorts of flavors. And that's where the steaky, yummy goodness comes from. For the reverse sear, we're going to cook the steak most of the way through, and then we're going to sear it at the very end to get that browning on there. So I have my oven set to 250 degrees. If you're reverse searing on the grill, you want to set your grill up for two-zone cooking. One side of the grill with no heat or low heat, the other side with the heat source, and you want to have a lid on there so the cool side is about 250 degrees. And you'll cook your steaks in there first. I'm going to cook all these steaks in the oven to begin with because it's convenient, but that's how we're going to do it. So I'm going to probe all of these so I can watch the temperatures. The filet and the ribeye, I'm going to cook to 110 degrees. My New York strips are a little bit thinner, so I'm going to cook those to 105 degrees because they're going to get more heat into them more quickly towards the center when I do the searing. Before we cook these, we want to season them. I'm just going to use some salt and pepper. If you have good quality beef and you're cooking it the right way, you don't need anything else. There's nothing wrong with Montreal steak seasoning, but if you've got a good steak and you're cooking it right, you don't need it. So we're going to liberally salt these. I've got some kosher salt here. We're going to really kind of not skimp on the salt. That's one of the keys to a really tasty steak. Honestly, you need that salt on there to get the flavor of the beef to wake up. So we're going to salt these rather generously. Just kind of snow it on there. And then we're going to, and while I'm at it, I'm going to pepper this side. I like to be kind of generous with the pepper. You don't have to be as generous with the pepper if you don't want to. Steak au poivre is a classic French dish which has so much pepper on it that you'd think it would be bad, but it is good. So we're going to salt and pepper those like so. And then I'm going to flip them over. Again, you don't need skewers for the tenderloin. That has to do with how we're going to reverse sear that one a little later on down the line. So Salt on both sides. Don't skimp. And pepper both sides. So when you probe your steaks, you want to make sure that the thermometer probe is in the very center of the steak, the thermal center. That's where it's coldest, and that's what you need to make sure your temperatures get up to. So for the fillet, I'm going to measure here. I can see where the center is. I'm going to put my finger here to mark it. I'm going to go in the side until my finger hits the meat. That's halfway down the steak. So that should be right in the center of the meat there. For the New York, you have to go in kind of at an angle. I mean, you could go in from the side, I suppose, but I find that's a little riskier to find it. Put it in an angle, mark where your finger's going to go, maintain that same angle, and go in like that. And then same trick for the prime rib, or prime rib. It's from the prime rib. It's the ribeye. We're going to go in like that, so that we're right in the center, like so. All right, I've got my steaks in the oven. I've attached the probes to the chef alarms, set to the right temperatures. I've got 110 degrees set for the fillet and for the ribeye, and I've got 105 degrees set for the New York. And so we're going to close this up and cook them. I can know when each kind of steak is at the temperature that we want it to be at, which means I can take that steak out at that temperature and continue. That's the great thing about actually measuring the temperatures. I'm going to get them all right. So let's cook these. All right, here we are in the demo kitchen still. Our steaks are done cooking in the oven for the initial part. I've cooked these New York strips to 205 degrees. Here I have a hot pan. I'm over high heat on gas here. I can turn that down just a hair. I'll turn that down. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to sear these. I'm going to put a tiny bit of high heat oil in the pan, in this case grapeseed oil. Any high heat oil will do. And then I'm going to put the steaks in, sear one side for just a minute or two. I'll probably do the top side because it's the drier side first, from how they came out of the oven. And that's going to get a better sear. And then I'm going to flip it over, put some butter, some thyme, and some garlic in the pan and baste it with that while I do the second side. You may have seen people do this in cooking shows. This is what they're doing. They're basting for flavor and for a better crust. So here goes. We're going to put this, I got just a little bit of high heat oil here. The steaks will give off some of their own fat, so that'll be good too. And we're going to go straight into the pan like that. You need to make sure that you have good ventilation in your kitchen when this is happening. Your kitchen's going to get pretty smoky when you're cooking steaks at high heat, just so you know. So we're going to cook this, like I said, for a minute or two per side. Got that over nice high heat. Thyme and garlic are really great for this. Rosemary is also good. You can use rosemary instead of thyme. You can use rosemary in addition to thyme. Any flavors you want to just have a hint of in the steak, go ahead and throw in with the butter when you flip this over. The butter is going to melt, it's going to brown, and it's going to absorb all those flavors from the thyme and from the garlic, and it's going to transfer those to the beef, and that's going to be delicious. So you can see a little smoke coming out of the pan here. That's appropriate. That's going to happen. There's going to be a lot more smoke when this goes down. So the steak is pretty ugly looking. It's just kind of gray on top there. That's what it looks like without the sear, and that's what it'll taste like without the sear. So we're going to take a look at the other side of this. Whew, hot. That's looking pretty nice. We're going to finish that sear with the baste. So in goes the butter into the pan, some garlic that I've sliced in half. You can also crush that, and the thyme. That's about 2 tablespoons of butter, by the way. So we're going to let that all mix together here. Listen to that sizzle. And we're going to start flipping that up onto the steak like this. Use a big spoon. I'm just going to flip that up on there. And we can go ahead and put the thyme on there. That would be great. The butter's melting, the butter's browning, the garlic's turning brown on the edges. And we're searing the underside. We can let some of the butter underneath there to get a little bit of a better brown underneath it. Like so. We're just going to keep flipping this butter up on there for a minute or so. And then we're going to take the temperature on this steak and see where we're at. I want this to come off the heat at about 125 degrees. For me, a little bit lower would be fine, but 125 is about what I'm shooting for. That's going to give us 130 or so when we finish our carryover, maybe 135, and that's going to be a nice medium rare, which is how, like I said, steaks generally are considered best and how I like my steaks best. So we'll go like that. I've got my Thermapen here. And we'll go ahead and stick that in there. All right, yep. So you can see that there's temperature gradients. It's hotter near the surface than it is inside. We're going to take that off right now before it overcooks. You can even wipe the pan out briefly with a paper towel. Leave some of the oil from the last cook in there, some of that butter and stuff like that, and you can keep going. So I'm going to reheat this, put it back over the heat, and now cook my second steak. A little bit more oil. Just a little. There we go. My pan's a little bit better heated this time than it was on the first one. This first side might take a little bit less time. So we'll just let the steak cook. The crust we got on that one is really nice. There's lots of nice buttery flavor and things like that. I might be able to get just a little bit more crust on this because the pan is up a little bit higher. We'll see how it goes. But one way or another, these are both going to be delicious steaks. So cook that, and then we'll do the same thing. This process, by the way, is the French term for it is poêler. It means to baste. That's a lot of smoke coming out of there, which means I've probably got some good crust already. That's nice. So in goes the butter, in goes the thyme and the garlic, like that. Listen to that thyme popping. If you could smell this, it's amazing. It's just amazing. So get that thyme up on there. Start flipping. By doing this, so we're cooking the bottom side, obviously most, because it's got the most contact with the heat, but we are completing the sear on the top side with the butter that we're throwing up on there. We're basically deep frying the top of the steak, which is manifestly delicious. So there's that. That's looking really nice. Let's go ahead and check the temp on that. All right, that's actually looking really nice. So put that back. And I'm gonna pull that off. This hot, kill the heat on that. There we go. Put that over here. I'm gonna go ahead and take this thyme out and just let it sit on top of there. We can get anything we want out of that. So that is how to pan sear your reverse sear steaks. And although we're going to show you 2 more ways of doing it, this is generally my personal favorite. The flavor that you get, I think it's really fun to work with the butter. It's just a really good way to go. Next, we're going to grill sear the ribeyes. So I'm going to grab those and we'll continue on. Ribeyes are great. I mean, they're great in the pan, but if you're going to grill a steak, ribeye is my favorite. Like I said before, the flavor from a grilled ribeye is so special and so different, and the smell from a grilled ribeye is just kind of indescribable. So I've got a really hot grill here. It's been preheating really well, really kind of flaming hot. If you're doing this on the grill outside, that's what you want also. You want a really high heat, hot grill. So I'm gonna just oil the grates a little bit. Just to prevent whatever sticking we can. And then I'm also going to put just a little bit of oil on the surface of the steak. That just helps the Maillard browning happen, helps the heat transfer. So I'm gonna put a little on there and just kind of brush it in. And then I'll get the other side when it's on the grill. But this is gonna go right on the grill, right here. That's gonna take a few minutes. This is a thicker steak, so it's gonna take a little bit longer to get that heat all the way through. But we do have some really, really high heat going on here. So that one's gonna go on also like that. We'll turn those in a couple minutes to get that nice grid pattern on the steaks. That's more for presentation than anything, but also wherever those grill lines are, has more of the flavor that you're looking for, more of that seared, charred flavor. So if you just cook your steaks like this and don't rotate them, you only get one line of flavor. By rotating them, you double the amount of char surface that you get. Or, I mean, as a mathematical approximation, doubling. So there you are. Obviously, I'm hiding behind the smoke here. Again, if you're doing this inside, ventilation is super, super important. You don't want this filling up your house, setting up your smoke alarms, and making your clothes smell like smoke. The method in the pan, I love. It is a little harder to keep track of the temperatures. You have to really watch it and make sure that you temp it and get it out of there. On the grill, it's a lot easier, honestly, because you can be temping the steak as you're going. So I don't even need to temp these yet, but I do want to keep a look, take an occasional look underneath to see how the lines are going. And that actually, you can see, that's quite lovely. So I'm going to turn that. Sometimes you have to kind of press down on the steak to make sure that it has contact with the grill or the griddle. Don't do that too much because there is water in there that we don't want to squish out, and you can actually squish it out. That's looking pretty nice too, honestly. So we're going to turn that one sideways like that, give those just a minute. And then we'll flip and we'll start to temp once we flip. These flare-ups we don't love. Like, I'd rather have that go away. I'm going to kind of move that off the heat for a second, let that die down. That's just going to happen, especially with ribeyes, which are really fatty. You're going to get that happening. So there we go. Now we've got a nice sear on that side. We'll flip it over. Check this one. That could use just another minute. We'll let that go on that side. Getting the second crosshatch pattern on the bottom side is not, strictly speaking, as necessary. Again, there's more flavor to be had there, but there's less need for it from an aesthetic standpoint. So this side got just a little bit crispy. That's going to be okay. We'll put that, this end's a little bit cooler than this end, so I'm going to move that up there. And we're going to start taking the temps on this. Oh, that's kind of perfect right there. That's a little warm in some places. This one's going to be a little bit more closer to medium, the medium rare. We got just a little sear on the back of that. Maybe spent a little too much time on the front side. That one we'll go ahead and start cooking there. We can just monitor that. We can check this. Yeah, okay. All right, let's get that off too. So we've let our steaks rest, which I didn't talk about before. After you cook the steaks, it is important to let them rest for 5 minutes or so. That will give those contracted muscle fibers a time to relax and reabsorb whatever juice they may have squished out to an extent. I've had both of these on the plate. This looks like a delicious meal right here, 2 steaks. A little too much for me, but I'd make a go of it if I needed to. So I'm going to just cut one of these open and take a look at it. We've got the thyme there off to the side. I'm going to cut that. And that. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's lovely in there. So, look at that. Beautiful. That's right on the edge of medium rare there. That might be just, no, that's perfect. That's perfect medium rare. We've got some nice dark pink, lots of juiciness. It's got some nice red color to it, but isn't raw. So that's lovely. Here we have one of our ribeyes. Let's take a look at how this did. The ribeye has a couple different muscles in it. I'm going to cut straight through the center so we can see what it's like right in there. And it's quite lovely. So you can see this side got a little bit more cooked than the other side. There's a little bit of a gray band here. I spent too much time searing on that side. But in general, this steak is in really great shape. That's a nice medium rare color. I've got nice juiciness there. All right, finally we come to our fillets. This is a really fun method, our last one. Just like the others, we've cooked these to 110 degrees internal temperature, and we're ready to go outside where we have a chimney full of charcoal that is flaming hot. The reason we put these skewers in there is so we can suspend the steak directly over the fire of that chimney. So we're basically going to be cooking this over what seems like a jet engine. It gives it an amazing sear. It doesn't take very long. And it's a great flavor. You get that charcoaly goodness. So let's go take a look. So we've got the steaks here on the skewers, like I said before. I've brushed them with a little bit of oil to help with the Maillard browning. We're going to put this on here, and we're just going to let that go for a couple minutes. Shouldn't take terribly long. There's lots of heat there. I can already hear it sizzling. If you want to cook steaks up to about 115 degrees and then kind of chill them, you can cook them later on, a little later. You don't want to let them sit overnight or something like that. It just won't be as good. They can be made just a little bit ahead of time and then all seared in quick succession that way. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. That is beautiful. Not quite there yet. The edges are great. The center needs a little bit more brown. Make sure you use long enough skewers that the heat transfer isn't going to go out to the edges and burn your hands. Gloves would not be a bad idea. There you go. Look at that. Look at that. That's lovely. Now that can be a little bit more seared in the center. I'm gonna do this other side for a minute and then maybe go back. Oh, yeah. So we still have a little time. We're at about 110 in parts of this, and because it's cooled off some. Now the edges are getting a little bit hotter, so I might pull this and have this one be a little on the rare side. We'll see how it goes. Oh, that's looking beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, we've got really nice sear on the bottom, on the top of this, and now also the bottom is getting some nice sear on it. We're going to give that just one more minute, and we'll start temping this here. And you know what? That is looking really nice. Oh yeah. So that's ready to come off. That's a 127. That's a degree or so north of where I'd like to be on that part, but the rest of it is right where it should be. And we'll go ahead and cook up the second one now. You can see on this steak that we finished this beautiful sear. Nice brown crust on there. Little bits of char on the edges. That's not burnt. That's just some nice char. That's lovely. I look forward to tasting that. That's going to be really good. So this is cooking up. It's just lovely. Look at that. That's a beautiful sear on there. We've got some nice sizzle. Nice brown peppercorns. I'm going to go ahead and flip that. This particular one's been tied, you can see, to hold it together better. It's from a little bit further down on the steak. All right. Let's get that off. Really hot chimney full of charcoal, skewers to suspend your steak above it, and turn it several times so you don't kill one side while you're getting up to temp. You want to pump the heat in equally from both sides. Let's go in, cut this open, and see what it looks like inside. And we're back inside now, a little wetter for wear, but that's okay. We got some great steak. This is rested for a couple of minutes. I'm going to pull these skewers out, cut it open, and see what it's like inside. Oh, there we go. Just going to cut straight through that string on this one. Beautiful, nice and pink. That might be 1 degree higher, a couple degrees higher than the medium rare I usually look for, but I'm not going to complain about that or send it back to the kitchen. So the important thing when you're cooking steaks is to not overcook them, obviously. You don't want them dried out. You put a lot of money into a good steak and you want to impress your own mouth if nobody else's. Testing steaks by poking your fingers doesn't really work. The only way to do it is to use thermometers to take the actual temperature of the steak. If you do that with a reverse sear, cooking in the oven to about 15 degrees below your target temperature, and then sear it in a hot pan on a hot grill or just over some flaming hot coals, you're going to end up with a steak that is browned and lovely on the outside and juicy and tender on the inside, and it'll be great. So grab some steaks, grab your thermometer, and happy cooking.